The arena roared with cheers and applause. The entire evening felt like an adrenaline-fueled whirlwind. Jake Randall stood in the center of the ring, his chest heaving heavily, face bruised and cut, but his eyes burning with confidence and pride. He had just won one of the toughest fights of his career, a grueling, exhausting battle that lasted nearly half an hour. Every punch was delivered with immense effort, but victory was secured. The referee raised Jake's hand, the signal of final victory. The crowd erupted in ovations, and Jake felt a fire of triumph blaze in his chest. He grabbed the microphone, trying to steady his pounding heart and command the arena with his words. "Listen up," his voice rang out loud and bold, cutting through the noise of the crowd. "You just saw how hard I fought for this win, but now I'll tell you something important. Jason Statham, he's just an actor playing a fighter on screen. In real life, he wouldn't last a second." The crowd exploded with laughter, whistles, and cries of support. Fans, accustomed to such provocative statements, echoed his words, shouting Jake's name and raising the volume in the arena. But amid the uproar, all eyes suddenly shifted to the front row, where Jason Statham himself was seated. His face remained expressionless, his eyes focused and calm. It seemed he already knew what he was going to say next. The tension in the air grew palpable, like the calm before a storm. The audience held its breath, waiting for what would happen next. Would the winner's words provoke a reaction from the actor, or would it end with just a bold declaration? In that moment, silence fell over the arena, and everyone understood the night was only just beginning. After Jake's daring speech, the crowd quieted for a moment. Even the loudest fans fell silent, as if awaiting something extraordinary. The atmosphere shifted, from wild excitement and support to tense anticipation. Among thousands of faces fixed on the front row, one stood out, Jason Statham's. He sat calmly, almost motionless, seemingly indifferent to the commotion around him. His gaze was focused, deep and confidently serene. It seemed he weighed every word and movement, preparing for his response. And suddenly, almost imperceptibly, movement began. Statham rose, slowly, confidently, like a man who knows the moment of truth has arrived. Each step Jason took echoed through the silence like a drumbeat. He walked toward the ring not with threat or anger, but with a calm dignity and inner strength. A slight smile played on his face, not mocking, but the kind that comes from someone confident in their own worth. At that moment, the crowd froze. Someone whispered to their neighbor, "What's he going to do?" Cameras switched to the actor, capturing every second of his approach. This moment promised to be a turning point, not just for the night, but for the entire atmosphere in the arena. Reaching the ring, Jason raised his hand to get the fighter's attention. Jake, tense but composed, turned toward him. The arena fell silent once again, this time from curiosity and a quiet tension. Statham extended his hand, a simple gesture but deeply significant. He looked Jake straight in the eyes without mockery or aggression. "Well done," Jason said quietly but firmly. "You won the fight. You earned it." His voice was steady, calm, and free of any arrogance. It carried the depth of experience and understanding. Then Statham continued, and his words seemed to ignite the crowd anew. "But a true fighter is not just physical strength. It's the ability to listen, learn, and respect your opponent." The silence was deafening. No one expected such wisdom and calm in response to the challenge that had just rung out from the ring. People exchanged looks, whispered among themselves, some unable to believe what they had just heard. This was not just a reply, it was a lesson no one could ignore. Jake, standing with the microphone in hand, felt something rising within him, not anger or pride, but surprise, and maybe even respect. He looked at Statham, and in his eyes flickered confusion and an inner dialogue no one else could hear. Who is this man? Why isn't he responding the way I expected? This moment marked a turning point, the beginning of a new chapter not only for the night but for the fighter himself. The crowd sat breathless. Many realized they were witnessing something extraordinary. There was no usual fury or verbal sparring in this confrontation. Instead, there was genuine human strength, the kind of respect so often missing in the brutal world of fighting. Slowly, the applause began, tentative at first, then growing louder and louder. These claps were no longer just for victory in the fight, but for the wisdom and true spirit of combat displayed. As the arena buzzed with applause, Jake mentally replayed the words he had heard. A question formed in his mind. What does it mean to be a true fighter? He began to understand that physical strength was only part of the journey, and the real battle was within oneself. This realization became his first step toward change. Jason lowered his hand, smiled gently, and gave a slight nod. His face expressed not only respect for the victor, but also a readiness to share his experience and knowledge. The stage was set for the next act, and everyone in the arena sensed that what lay ahead was far more than just a fight. After Jason Statham made his calm but profound statement, the atmosphere in the arena trembled slightly. Jake stood still, clutching the microphone, staring directly at the actor. His eyes revealed a mix of surprise and uncertainty. Inside, pride and the desire to prove himself wrestled fiercely. He hadn't expected such a response, certainly not that the man he had called merely an actor would speak with the quiet confidence of someone who had endured much in life. Jake felt this moment would challenge him not just physically, but internally as well. The crowd fell silent, waiting for the fighter's reply. Jake paused, took a deep breath to gather his thoughts, then spoke slowly and measuredly. What exactly are you trying to say? That I should believe you're a real fighter? That you're better than me? His voice carried a challenge, but now tinged with doubt. His words echoed through the arena, stirring whispers and tense anticipation. Everyone knew a dialogue was about to unfold, one that could either escalate the tension or diffuse it. Jason didn't rush his answer. He looked at Jake intently, as if studying not just his eyes but his very soul. I'm not here to prove who's better, he replied calmly. My life isn't just about stages and cameras. I've trained hard, learned a lot, and come to understand that strength isn't just a punch or technique. Strength is knowing when to speak and when to listen, when to be humble and when to be resolute. His words rang out not merely as a response, but as a lesson wrapped in a simple phrase. The crowd hung on every syllable, the atmosphere growing more tense yet profoundly moving. Jake struggled to accept the words immediately. Inside his mind, a battle raged, whether to embrace the wisdom of another's experience or to cling stubbornly to his own pride. Why are you so sure I should listen to you? He finally asked, his doubt laid bare. The question rippled through the arena, sparking curiosity. Everyone was eager to hear Jason's reply. Jason slowly smiled and said, Because words matter, but actions matter more. If you want, let's show it not with words, but with deeds. A sparring match. No words, no claims, just technique and respect. The crowd erupted in excitement. Some rose to their feet, sensing that what was about to unfold was far more than a verbal exchange. Jake looked at Jason intently, a new spark flickering in his eyes, not of defiance, but of interest and respect. He lowered the microphone and said, All right, show me what you've got. In that moment, the internal debate ended. A new chapter of the fight began, where actions would speak louder than words. The entire arena felt the tension peak. People sat breathless, waiting to see what would come next. The fighters prepared not only physically but mentally. Here, in this impromptu duel, everyone wanted to witness not just skill but the spirit of a true fighter. Thus began the moment when words gave way to action, and the opponents ceased to be just the winner and the actor. They became two warriors ready to demonstrate what true strength really means. Not loud proclamations, but respect, discipline, and the willingness to learn from one another. When Jake and Jason announced the start of the sparring, the atmosphere shifted. From the initial excitement and celebration of Jake's victory, all attention now focused on the ring. Every person in the arena sat on the edge of their seat, anticipating what this extraordinary duel would bring. No one knew what to expect from this unusual pair. In the corner of the ring where Jake had claimed his first victory, now stood two fighters. But they no longer stood as mere opponents. They were two men about to show the entire arena what a real fight truly meant. Jake was tense. His mind raced with thoughts. Can I win this battle? Or does Statham really possess skills I never even suspected? His muscles were tight, his body bracing for the challenge ahead. Yet beneath his composure, his inner world was anything but calm. Jason, on the other hand, remained perfectly composed, which only heightened the tension in the air. He had been through countless training sessions, fights, stresses, and struggles. This moment was just another link in a long chain of events. His face was calm, as if he were sitting quietly at a cafe rather than standing in a ring. His eyes flicked over Jake, noticing the subtle uncertainty in his gaze, as if Jake was bracing for a trap. While the referee made the final preparations, both fighters stayed rooted in their corners. Jake tried to steady his breathing, lightly shaking his hands. His breaths grew deeper, his heart pounding in rhythm with the referee's steps around the ring. His muscles ached, but the internal fire, fueled by self-doubt and Jason's formidable challenge, pushed him forward. Jason stood like a statue. His movements were smooth but precise. He slowly turned his head from side to side, carefully observing every twitch and shift of his opponent. He knew his task wasn't merely to win, but to demonstrate what it means to be not only strong, but wise in battle. The arena grew utterly silent, as if every soul inside awaited a single signal to unleash the storm. The lights dimmed, casting an aura of suspense and anticipation. Those moments before the fight stretched on, feeling eternal. Then, the moment arrived. The referee stepped between the fighters and raised his hand. That gesture was the signal that this was not just a physical clash, but a true contest of spirit and strength. The hand dropped, and the referee's shout echoed throughout the arena. "Fight!" The silence that had ruled moments before erupted into a roar. The crowd, unable to hold back, screamed their support for their favorites. Jake, fueled by the crowd's energy, took the first step forward. He knew he had to prove his resolve to everyone watching. But Jason remained perfectly still, calmly waiting. His eyes never left Jake's, trying to read his movements, to predict what his opponent would do next. Unlike the fighter, Statham made no sudden moves, showed no rush. Every inch of his body radiated control, despite Jake's aggressive gestures. Jake knew he had to strike first. His training taught him to use an opponent's aggression against them. He moved forward, trying to skillfully bypass Statham's defense. Every move, every punch was calculated, and Jake understood that if he didn't act now, he'd give Jason the chance to seize the initiative. The first punch was swift and sharp, but Jason intercepted it by sidestepping smoothly. It was impressive. Jake hadn't expected an actor, who wasn't a professional fighter, to so confidently throw him off balance. The crowd exploded with applause and cheers, amazed as Statham effortlessly dodged the blow without losing his footing, immediately countering. Jake felt his confidence begin to crack. He wasn't prepared for such fluid agility. As the fight progressed and blows grew stronger and faster, Jake realized that sheer power wasn't enough. He knew he had to be smarter. But how? It felt less like a battle against a man and more like a contest against someone who could foresee his moves before he even consciously decided them. With every motion, Jason revealed more of his technique. He toyed with Jake, slightly delaying attacks, showing him how far he still was from catching him. Jake began to understand that it wasn't enough to strike quickly. He needed to think several steps ahead. His muscles started to tire, and this was yet another test of his spirit. Every move Jason made showed that he was not just physically prepared, but understood the importance of silence, planning, and caution in a fight. Statham was never rushed. He turned Jake's strength against him. Each step, each counter-strike made Jake feel how far he was from true mastery. The arena quieted again as everyone watched every movement with intense focus. Jake, his confidence shaken, felt an internal struggle. He knew he had to admit, here he was outmatched. But this was not defeat. It was a challenge. As the fight grew more intense, Jake began to notice a change within himself. He no longer thought only about winning. He realized he was learning, not just in the fight, but in life. This was his first real lesson, the ability to admit mistakes and grow from them. Perhaps that was the true fight, not to win at any cost, but to understand that every step, every mistake, is part of the journey. Jake understood that Jason was giving him a chance to become not just physically stronger, but wiser. After both fighters stepped back, breathing heavily, the crowd held its breath. The tension had reached its peak. Who would make the first move? Who would take control? These questions hung thick in the air. Jake stood ready for the next attack, but already understood that the answer wouldn't lie in the speed of his punches, but in the realization that true strength, in both fighting and life, doesn't always mean simply winning. After Jake and Jason retreated to their corners, the tension in the air became almost tangible. The crowd, which just moments before had roared with excitement, now fell into complete silence. Every eye was fixed on the ring, and the hearts of the spectators seemed to beat in sync with the fighters, waiting for the signal to begin. Jake stood in his corner, watching his opponent intently. His body already ached. Every blow he had taken in the previous rounds reminded him of itself. Yet, he was filled with determination. This is the moment not only to prove I'm a strong fighter, but to show I can face a smart opponent, he thought. Clenching his fists, adrenaline surged anew through his veins. His eyes narrowed, his gaze sharpened. Jason, in the opposite corner, remained incredibly calm. His breathing was steady, and his face held the focus of a seasoned chess player who had already anticipated his opponent's moves several steps ahead. He understood this wasn't just sparring for Jake. It was a chance to learn something deeper. Statham knew it would be tough, but he was certain that mastering one's emotions was what decided victory. The referee's signal pierced the silence. The crowd held its breath as the ring came alive. Jake took the first step forward, moving decisively toward Jason. He swung quickly, preparing a powerful strike. It was his style, to attack first and seize the initiative immediately. The blow was meant to be lightning fast, but Jason, as expected, was ready. He made no sudden moves, simply waiting for the right moment. When Jake attacked, Statham skillfully dodged, leaning slightly to the side. Jake barely realized his punch had missed before Jason was already a step away, preparing to counter. Jason was faster. Damn, Jake thought, but wasted no time dwelling on it. He shifted to defense, bracing for the next attack. It wasn't just a defeat, it was a lesson he couldn't ignore. Jake attacked again, but now he understood that brute force wouldn't work. He began changing tactics, trying to read every move Jason made, predicting what would come next. He didn't immediately fall back on his usual techniques. This was his first real fight where he had to think several moves ahead. With each strike, Jake felt his body shifting into a different rhythm. He realized that all his training had focused on physical strength, but now he was forced to confront the importance of strategy. His thoughts tangled, and every time he failed to anticipate Statham's moves, his power was wasted, meaninglessly. Jason moved with confidence and fluidity. He didn't try to deliver powerful blows, but instead sought to understand how Jake would act. His movements were calculated, as if every step was planned well in advance. Jake felt his energy slowly drain while Jason remained composed and calm, like someone accustomed to grueling fights and long sessions. Finally, Jake made another mistake. He overdid his aggression. Hoping to land a decisive blow, he misjudged his attack. He took a risk, and just as his fist missed Jason, Statham swiftly twisted Jake's arm, leaving him vulnerable. But Jason didn't use the moment to strike back. Instead, he gently pushed Jake backward, stepping into his path and forcing him to regain balance. The movement was so smooth that Jake barely realized what had happened. He felt his pride slightly wounded, adding inner tension. Yet, this realization became a crucial turning point. He understood that pride was not just strength, but also the willingness to accept defeat and keep fighting. The crowd watched every step, every exchange of blows, as the referee called a timeout. It was a necessary break, allowing the fighters to rest and the audience to catch their breath. But for Jake, it was a moment to collect himself and reevaluate his approach. He stood in his corner, arms lowered, breathing deeply. He tried to focus, but the inner tension wouldn't release. Jake recognized his insecurity as a weak spot. He already knew Statham possessed a mastery beyond ordinary fighting skills. Now, he realized he must learn not only to win but also to accept losses and grow from his mistakes. Meanwhile, Jason stood calmly in his corner, watching Jake closely. His face betrayed neither joy nor mockery. He simply observed and waited. Statham knew these few minutes could be pivotal for Jake. He also knew that unless Jake changed his approach, he would never become a true fighter. He wanted Jake to see the fight not as competition, but as a lesson. When the referee signaled to resume, Jake felt the arena's energy surge again. Stepping into the center of the ring with every step, he sensed his body processing new information. He understood that if he didn't change his tactics now, failure awaited him. He looked at Jason, and for a moment their eyes met. There was something in that gaze that made Jake feel he wasn't alone in this fight, after all. Statham wasn't just an opponent. He was a mentor, willing to give him a chance. And in that moment, Jake realized that perhaps victory wasn't as important as the lesson he could learn. Jake attacked again, but now his strikes were more calculated. He understood that not everything in a fight depended on the power of the punch, but on how well you could anticipate and block your opponent's moves. Instead of relying solely on physical strength, he began working on technique, striving to develop intuition and learn from Jason. The crowd noticed the change. He had become calmer, patiently waiting for the right moments to strike with maximum effectiveness. Every step he took was now more confident. As soon as Jake began acting more thoughtfully, rather than just on instinct, the results came quickly. He felt every strike become more precise, and his reactions to Jason's movements faster. He no longer saw the fight as a simple contest, but as an opportunity to grow. The arena filled with noise once again. Fans cheered for their favorite. But this time there was no complacency. Everything now depended not only on who could win, but on who could learn along the way. As the first round drew to a close, Jake already understood that he was on a path toward something greater than just victory. Jason's words kept replaying in his mind. A true fighter is not only strong in body, but knows how to listen and learn. Those words wouldn't leave his thoughts despite the adrenaline and fatigue. With every punch and every maneuver, he began to realize that in this fight, he needed not only to show strength, but humility. In the ring, his home turf, where he was used to being the dominant force, Jake confronted something he'd never faced before: the necessity to admit that his approach to fighting had been superficial. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a revelation. With every next move, every hit, he felt his confidence slowly crumble, but at the same time he sensed a glimpse of something new. An internal conflict flared within him, whether to be honest with himself or to keep up appearances. After several exchanges, Jake realized that every step he took was less sure than before. His body was tiring, and his mind was filling with doubt. Jason continued to move with a grace and calmness that made Jake feel like he was losing control. Statham didn't try to land crushing blows. He was precise, and his movements flowed like a master who, through years of training, had learned not just to win but to do so with respect for his opponent. The crowd felt the atmosphere in the ring shift. Everyone watching began to realize that Jake was no longer just fighting the man opposite him. He was battling his own limitations. This was a far more complex challenge than he had ever imagined. Jake started to hold back, increasingly feeling the internal struggle within himself. He had thought he needed to win at all costs, but another thought grew inside him. What if winning isn't the main thing? The pause after an exchange of blows became a moment of revelation for Jake. Suddenly, he understood that relying solely on brute strength and aggression was no longer enough. It became clear in his mind that this fight was a lesson he had to learn. He looked at Jason's calm face and realized he would never win unless he began to fight, not just with his body, but with his mind. His aggression and desperate desire to win had become his weakness. He started to understand that this battle was far deeper than a mere physical confrontation. It was a fight with himself. Taking a deep breath, Jake paused. He felt his pride soften. This wasn't defeat, but in that moment, he recognized the need to adopt a new approach. The crowd watched every move, every glance, but Jake was now focused not only on his opponent. His attention turned inward. How do I learn to be a true fighter? This question echoed in his mind. He didn't have the answer yet, but he sensed this moment in the fight would change his life. With each passing second, he felt his body and mind sinking to a new rhythm. Previously obsessed with victory, he now thought about the process, about learning to respect himself and his opponent, about finding an inner peace that had always eluded him. He knew he had to change his approach. In this fight, victory or defeat mattered less than the realization that this moment was a chance to become better, not only in the ring, but in life. Jason continued to move with unwavering confidence, his technique smooth and flawless. He didn't rush, as if he knew that understanding the true essence of the fight required time. He was full of respect for his opponent, and every gesture showed it. The crowd couldn't understand why Statham wasn't using his full power or delivering more decisive blows. This was more than a fight. It was a lesson. Jake began to realize that Statham wasn't just fighting him. He was giving him a chance to learn. As Jake launched another attack, Jason didn't try to block him outright. Instead, he simply slipped the blows with such ease that it looked almost like a dance. He wasn't relying on brute strength, but was, in a way, making Jake part of this dance. It was an indirect lesson. To win, you must first learn to respect the movement, respect the process. Each exchange showed Jake that his old methods no longer worked. He realized he would never truly learn unless he was willing to admit his mistakes and weaknesses. This was a defeat, not physical, but a defeat of his pride and his old views on fighting and life. With every punch Jake missed and every moment he failed to anticipate Statham's moves, he felt his old confidence crumble inside. He began to understand that strength wasn't just muscles, it was the ability to control one's internal struggle. And to win, he first had to conquer himself. As the fight continued, Jake increasingly felt his internal battle overshadow the external one. He was no longer so focused on defeating Jason as on understanding his methods. This had become a genuine lesson for him. Every movement Jason made, every glance, every dodge became part of that lesson. Jake started to realize that in this fight, he needed not only to beat his opponent, but to overcome his own pride. In this battle, he had to learn humility. He felt his body and mind begin to move in sync, and suddenly understood that this lesson might be more important than any victory. At one point, as the fight paused again, Jake felt changed. He wasn't yet a winner, but he was no longer the same man. Standing in his corner, reflecting on his actions and the words he spoke before the fight, he understood that victory was not just physical strength, but the ability to be honest with oneself. Jake now knew that this fight was not merely a battle for a title, but a struggle for personal transformation. The internal conflict he had faced showed him that true strength lies in the ability to accept, learn, and move forward despite defeat. Jake stood in his corner, still catching his breath. He felt his heart beating to the rhythm of inner change, unrelated to the physical fight. He no longer looked at Jason with contempt or competitive defiance. The confidence that winning came only through strength and lightning-fast strikes was gone. He realized all his experience until that moment had been preparation for this internal breakthrough. Every punch he missed, every dodge Jason executed, became more than just moments in a fight. They were an invitation to reflection. He understood that with each movement, each teaching maneuver from Statham, he himself was changing. And it wasn't defeat, it was transcendence. Living through every moment, Jake felt his perception of what it means to be a fighter shifting profoundly. He lifted his head and glanced around the arena, but his thoughts were far from the crowd. The image of Statham, the man who hadn't tried to defeat him with brute force but had aimed to teach, played repeatedly in his mind. In Jason's eyes, Jake saw not just experience and wisdom, but a deep respect for the person standing before him, and he realized that this respect was needed not only by Jason but also by himself. Every new round, every exchange of blows, now made Jake think beyond just winning. He began to understand that to become a true fighter, he had to acknowledge his weaknesses. He no longer saw the fight as merely a contest for a title or recognition. He sought something greater. He caught himself noticing that none of his punches were like they used to be. He couldn't afford to lose control again. But this wasn't about winning at all costs. It was about being honest with himself, about being open to new experiences. As Jake launched another attack, he felt his approach shift. His punches were no longer harsh or reckless. He started focusing more on how to deliver strikes and how to read his opponent's movements. Though his body still felt fatigued, his spirit grew stronger. He was no longer fighting Jason. He was fighting himself and the old beliefs he once held about fighting. Meanwhile, as Jake searched for his path, Jason seemed both near and distant. His movements were so natural they didn't appear rehearsed. Every maneuver, every dodge was the result of internal control that Jake could only observe but not replicate. Statham didn't rush. He could have ended the fight much sooner but kept giving Jake a chance. He continued teaching him, even if Jake wasn't fully aware of it yet. Jake felt weakness return to his punches when he failed to avoid Jason's counterattack. But instead of feeling defeated, he felt confidence growing, that he was truly learning. It was a sense of inner progress. He realized that each time he missed a target, he became a little better. Now, Jake wasn't just aware of his body and movements, but also of what was happening inside his mind. He understood that this fight wasn't just a test of his physical strength. It was a test of his inner world. All those words from Jason, respect your opponent, know how to listen, understand your weaknesses, were becoming part of his personal experience. He realized that this was a fight not only for a title, but for his own transformation. Jake attacked again. His strikes were more precise and more cautious. He no longer tried to land a powerful blow every time. Now he wanted to feel how each step resonated within his body. He sensed his approach was changing, that every strike was not just physical effort, but part of a logical process. He began to see that every step he took was part of something greater than just a fight for victory. When Jake swung again, he no longer fought to win at any cost. He knew that humility was his strength, humility before himself and his opponent. With every new movement, he learned to be better, not out of fear of losing, but out of a desire to understand and grow. And that was what mattered most. When Statham blocked his strike once more, Jake felt his internal struggle shift into respect. This wasn't defeat. It was an acknowledgement that he was ready to admit there was still much to learn. In that moment, there was no pride or shame, only the awareness that he had changed. Now he could move forward with a new perspective, a different view of the fight, and himself. With every move, Jake felt his body and mind begin to work in harmony. He was no longer the fighter who battled every punch, desperate to win at any price. He became the one who sought in every attack and every movement an opportunity to understand how to be better. Jason, maintaining his calm demeanor, continued to watch closely. As Jake threw another punch, he noticed Jake's technique evolving, becoming more confident and less hurried. Statham wasn't perfect, but in this fight he was showing Jake that perfection isn't always about winning in the ring. It's about constant progress, about being open to new possibilities. At that moment, Jake realized he had become more open to those possibilities, not just fighting Jason, but fighting himself and the old stereotypes he had held inside. He began to see that to be a true fighter, he needed not only to win battles, but also to accept his mistakes and flaws. When the fight ended and Jake stood in his corner, he felt he was no longer the same man who had entered the ring. He wasn't a winner in the usual sense, but in his soul there was a victory he couldn't put into words. He understood that not every victory is visible in a single moment, but every step on the path to oneself can be the most important. Jason approached him, extending his hand again with a gentle smile. "You've already become better. Keep moving in that direction." Those words rang like a signal to Jake. He hadn't finished the fight with a title, but he had finished it with a new understanding. And that was more than just a victory in the ring. The crowd gradually quieted after the final round. The tension that had hung in the air throughout the fight began to fade, but the feeling remained that something important had happened. Jake stood center ring, his breath still heavy, his body aching from exhaustion. He didn't know who had won, and he wasn't sure that it even mattered anymore. Jason Statham stood nearby, also weary, but his face remained calm as always. He made no sudden moves, no wild gestures, no jubilant jumps. He simply stood beside Jake, watching him like a mentor who understood that the true importance lay not in the fight's end, but in the lessons taught along the way. All eyes in the arena were fixed on the two fighters standing center ring. The crowd was engulfed in silence, frozen in a moment of profound realization. Jake felt his pride begin to dissolve. He didn't know who had won, and it no longer mattered. He understood that everything that had happened in this fight was far more important than any title or victory. This was a battle where he learned what had been missing: respect, patience, and understanding. He acknowledged that winning in the ring isn't just about muscles and powerful strikes. It's also about being honest with oneself. This moment was his victory, a victory over his own ego. Understanding this brought him a sense of relief and inner harmony, and he felt his soul fill with something new. He was no longer the cocky fighter who fought first and thought later. Now he was someone who could listen, learn, and move forward without standing still. Jason approached Jake, and their eyes met. In Jason's gaze there was no pride or triumph, only respect and a quiet satisfaction that his lesson had been heard. "You've taken a step many fighters fear to take," Jason said, quietly but powerfully. "You didn't just fight. You began to understand that being strong isn't enough. You must also be humble. That is a true fight." Jake nodded slowly, acknowledging the depth behind those simple words. He realized that from this moment on, his view of the world, of fighting, and of himself would never be the same. When the referee raised Jake's hand to signal the end of the match, the crowd erupted in applause once again. But this time, the applause was not only for the winner, but for the lesson he had learned. The arena was filled not just with joy for victory, but with pride in the journey Jake had taken. His victory was not only physical, but moral. He stood in the ring not as a fighter chasing a title, but as a man who had redefined his path and chosen new goals. This moment was the culmination of everything that had happened that night. The crowd applauded not only Jake, but also Jason Statham, who had shown that in a fight, what matters is not just physical success, but inner strength as well. As the arena slowly began to empty, Jake approached Jason and looked at him with gratitude. "You're right," he said quietly. "I used to think strength was just about landing punches, but you showed me that strength is about controlling yourself and your pride." Jason smiled, his face light and calm once again, just as it had been at the start of the fight. He felt proud, not of titles or victories, but of having shared an important lesson with this young fighter. A lesson that fighting isn't just a battle against an opponent, but a battle with oneself. "Remember," Statham said, "every fight is not just about winning or losing, but a step on the path to yourself. The important thing is not to stand still." As Jake walked out of the arena, his thoughts were clear and calm. This evening had become a true turning point in his life. He realized it didn't matter who won. What mattered was who learned to be better, who took a step inward. The fight he had just fought was the beginning of a new journey. He wasn't a winner in the traditional sense, but he had become a winner for himself. His attitude toward life, fighting, and himself had changed forever. And that was far more valuable than any title. In his willingness to acknowledge his mistakes and weaknesses, Jake found strength, a strength he had never known before. And that was the true victory, a victory of spirit,